Getting the NDIS back on track #1 bill passed through Parliament on 22nd of August 2024. And now, from the 3rd of October, the bill came into effect. What does this mean? What has changed? And how will this affect support delivery? There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive in. Hi, my name is Lucia. I'm a support coordinator from True Support team here in Melbourne, here to explain what the new changes look like. Let's not waste any time and, hopefully, make some sense of this. And while you're here, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It's a small gesture, but helps me to continue creating content like this. Make sure you watch both parts of the video, as I will mention a small piece of information that may save you a bit of time with your admin at the end. So let's go. On the 3rd of October, the new NDIS bill has passed to law. From now on, participants can only use their NDIS funds for items listed as approved NDIS supports. There will also be a list of items that NDIS funding cannot cover. There is a replacement rule that allows a participant to substitute a support that is not an NDIS support in specific cases, and this is referred to as replacement supports. NDIA has also been quite clear in saying that even if the evidence is provided for the replacement support, the agency might still not approve it. And this will be not a reviewable decision. Another request can't be logged for a 12-month period. New and reviewed plans will show total budget amounts, funding component amounts, and funding periods. Eligibility to the scheme will be based on ability to demonstrate that the support they require is NDIS support. This is both for NDIA and early intervention streams. NDIA will then advise the applicant which stream they qualify for, or if they qualify for the both streams. The NDIA can now request information or assessments from a participant to test whether they are still eligible for the scheme. They will give the person 90 days to provide information, or in other circumstances longer if needed. The person access will be revoked if the person does not provide this information within the given time. A person is then able to request a review of this decision and then resubmit an access request. The NDIA can change plan management type if they believe the participant requires help managing funds, or because NDIA has a reason to believe that the funding is being misused. Introduction of impairment notices system such that classifies each participant's impairment into one or more of the 6 categories: intellectual, cognitive, sensory, neurological, physical, and psychosocial. Let's go into these in more detail. In this part 1 of the video, we will go over the sections that you can see on your screen now. So let's begin. Separate pathways, section 21. When applying to access the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Agency will assess and inform applicants whether they meet the disability requirements, early intervention requirements, or both. Previously, the NDIS Act lacked specific pathways for disability or early intervention requirements. The key change is now NDIA will have to separately assess whether a person qualifies through disability stream, early intervention stream, or if they qualify for both. This change is meant to provide clearer pathways for applicants and ensure they understand what supports they qualify for and which supports they can access through NDIS. Clarification of disability requirements, section 24. The recent updates to the section 24 of the NDIS Act now specify that to access the NDIS, individuals must demonstrate a need for supports classified as NDIS supports. This change introduces the term NDIS supports, which ties into much debated lists dividing what the NDIS will fund versus what it won't. Naturally, with the introduction of these lists, we're also seeing a healthy dose of confusion, misinterpretation, and contradictions from the NDIA, a delightful bonus for everyone navigating these changes. Previously, the disability requirements were more generalized, which sometimes allowed overlap with maybe mainstream services or even access to supports that weren't backed by evidence. The updated criteria now restricts access to NDIS supports that are specifically listed and evidence-based. It's important to note, though, that not all evidence-based supports in the world will make it onto this NDIS approved list. So while the intention is to create clearer boundaries, the reality may leave many participants and providers scrambling to figure out which supports qualifies and which don't. This will, or already has, impacted those participants that received supports that are now not on the NDIS support list and are considered non-NDIS supports. Clarification of early intervention requirements, Section 25. Similar to the previous Section 24 disability requirements, this section, Section 25, the early intervention criteria, now emphasize that access to the NDIS is appropriate when the required supports are NDIS supports. This change helps differentiate NDIS responsibilities from mainstream services, reducing ambiguity. Additionally, the criteria for functional capacity has been clarified, focusing on measurable benefits such as mitigating, alleviating, or preventing deterioration in a person's ability to manage 6 key domains, which are communication, social interaction, learning, mobility, self-care, and self-management. The updated section also emphasized the importance of strengthening informal supports like building capacity of a carer. What really stands out is the inclusion of fluctuating or episodic impairments in the eligibility criteria. The Act now makes it clear that just because an impairment isn't consistent doesn't mean it isn't permanent. A welcome clarification for anyone who's been stuck in a limbo because of vague definitions. On top of that, the CEO's discretion has been streamlined. If your impairment is listed in the NDIS rules, it's now much easier to tick that box, which should hopefully cut down on bureaucratic back and forth. Limit on making new access requests. Section 19. If an individual's participant status is revoked and they request a review of that decision, they cannot submit another access request until the review process is complete. This measure aims to streamline the review process and prevent overlapping applications. In the case where the access was declined following a review, a new application for access can be submitted only after a 12-month period. Previously to the change, participants could reapply to access NDIS during a review process. The change now prohibits new applications, new access requests, while a review has been requested and is in progress. This will possibly reduce NDIS administrative workload and hopefully reduce conflict in decisions. The negative is that this may delay access for those needing urgent supports, as they must await review outcomes. Issuance of impairment notices, Section 32BA. Starting on January 1st, 2025, participants will receive an impairment notice when they meet the NDIS access criteria or are transitioned to a new framework plan. This impairment notice will provide a record detailing the specific impairments that contribute to the person's eligibility for NDIS access. Each participant's impairments will be categorized into one or more categories, including intellectual, cognitive, sensory, neurological, physical, and psychosocial. In the original NDIS Act, there was no structural impairment notification system. Eligibility was based solely on the participants' conditions without formally categorizing impairments. For existing participants, impairment notices will be issued when they transition to the new framework plans. And the dates for transitioning already existing participants to the new framework plans have not been stated as of yet by NDIA. Participants can seek a variation to add or remove impairments at any time after meeting access. And if a participant disagrees with a decision about their impairments, they can request a review of that decision. It's important to understand that the fundamental basis of funding remains the participant's disability-related needs. Introduction of impairment notices serves to clearly document the participants' impairments, ensuring that the support funded are directly related to their disability and meet the reasonable and necessary criteria. So, the very simplified overview of the whole process for being approved NDIS supports looks like this. A person has diagnosis conditions for which they meet access to the NDIS scheme. These conditions result in certain impairments. The NDIA categorizes these impairments into one or more of the 6 defined groups, as I mentioned previously. and the supports are provided based on their relevance to the documented impairments and adherence to the reasonable and necessary criteria. Hopefully you're still with me. Last but not least, on top of this, each support must be reasonable and necessary individually, but also as a package of supports for the participant. This means that if a participant requires supports with overlapping purposes or expertise, this may be considered as duplication of supports and therefore ineligible for funding, or perhaps only one of those supports may be funded. Supports for specific impairments, Section 34. The 2024 amendments to Section 34 of the NDIS Act bring big changes to how supports are assessed and approved. The big addition here is a new requirement, AA, which spells out that funded supports must be tied to the participant's eligible impairments. This means everything has to fit within the definition of NDIS supports. Previously, some supports were assessed based on how they related to a participant's diagnosis or condition and its functional impact. But now things are a bit more specific. Supports need to match up with the impairment categories, like intellectual, physical, psychosocial, that get the participant onto the NDIS plan in the first place. In other words, it's less about the diagnosis and more about the practical challenges those impairments create. It's a shift that sounds good on paper, but might feel more complicated in practice. Here's where it gets a little tricky. These changes officially started on October 3rd, 2024, but the rollout of impairment notices, which will categorize participants' qualifying impairments, won't start until January 1st, 2025. For existing participants, the notices will come into play gradually as plans are reviewed or transitioned. Until then, the NDIA will still use current documentation and evidence to assess supports. Is this a seamless transition? Probably not, but it's the system we've got for right now. One thing to note is that the amendments do acknowledge the bigger picture, a participant's environment or coexisting conditions. Things that might not independently meet NDIS eligibility are now being considered as factors that impact overall well-being. However, the catch is that eligibility for supports still has to be locked in at the time of plan approval. This could be a hurdle for those who need change frequently. Now let's talk about what this means in the real world. Supports are going to face stricter scrutiny. If a support doesn't clearly connect to the participant's impairment, it might not make the cut anymore. That's a tough pill to swallow for some participants, especially if they're used to having those supports in place. On top of that, participants will need to provide more targeted evidence to justify supports, cue the extra paperwork, and possibly a few headaches. For people with fluctuating or coexisting conditions, meeting eligibility criteria at the time of plan approval could be tricky. They'll likely need updated reports and assessments to show how these conditions affect their impairments and the supports they need. And let's not forget, the tighter focus on NDIS supports could mean some services that overlap with health or education systems might now be off limits. Plan management decisions, Section 44. The updated Section 44 of the NDIS Act introduces more specific conditions under which participants, registered plan management providers, or plan nominees are restricted from managing NDIS funding. Compared to the 2013 Act, the changes place a greater emphasis on accountability and risk management. For instance, participants or plan nominees can now be disqualified if they've been convicted of offenses punishable by 2 years or more in prison, or those involving fraud or dishonesty. This is a notable tightening of eligibility criteria, clearly aimed at safeguarding NDIS funds from potential misuse. Another key addition is the focus on compliance with Section 46, which governs the proper use and reporting of NDIS funds. If there's a reasonable likelihood that a participant, plan nominee, or plan manager would not comply with these requirements, they will be prevented from managing funding. The NDIA is also given more discretion to assess what constitutes unreasonable risk, backed by specific criteria outlined in the NDIS rules. The NDIS rules plays a critical role in applying the section. They provide clear guidance on what qualifies as unreasonable risk. and detail the circumstances where fund management would be considered unsuitable. For example, the rules might include patterns of financial mismanagement or previous breaches of reporting obligations as grounds for restriction. Ultimately, these changes aim to strike a balance, empowering participants to manage their funding responsibly while putting safeguards in place to protect against misuse. The Act now closes gaps where risks may have previously gone unchecked, creating a more structured and accountable system for managing NDIS funds. This approach reflects the NDIS increasing focus on financial integrity and participant protection. Okay, this video is getting a little bit too long. Well done for sticking around. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to stay with me for the part 2 of the video, where we will go over the rest of the changes. Please make sure to like and subscribe so I can continue to make this type of content available.